She hit the marble floor of a $60 billion mansion, and nobody moved. 500 people in diamonds and designer suits watched a woman bleed. Her husband stood over her and said the words he had clearly rehearsed for years. "You are nothing. You came from nothing, and you will leave with nothing." And he believed every single word. What he didn't know, what she didn't even know, was that the floor she was bleeding on belonged to her. Every chandelier above her head, every painting on every wall, the entire $60 billion estate, hers, from the moment she was born. The man calling her worthless had spent 5 years trying to steal her grandmother's tiny house in Georgia while his wife secretly owned one of the largest fortunes in America. And it was a small silver pendant, the one that snapped from her neck when she fell, that started unraveling everything. One piece of jewelry, one security guard who recognized an engraving, and a secret buried for 32 years was finally coming home. The truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it slides quietly across a marble floor and lands exactly where it needs to. If this story speaks to something you felt being underestimated, overlooked, or told you don't matter, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Drop a comment telling me, what would you have done in Lenora's place? Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Every like tells us to keep making stories like this one.
The surveillance footage recorded it all with chilling clarity. A woman in a dress she did not own, falling back onto a marble floor. A man, his hands still out from the push. 500 guests, dressed in their finest, stood motionless, like exhibits in a terrible gallery. Then came the sound, that sickening, distinct thud of a person hitting solid Italian marble. Lenora Washington crashed onto the ballroom floor of the Harrison estate. The blow sent a shock of pain through her body, making her sight go fuzzy. A drop of blood bloomed on her lip, a stark crimson on the pale stone. For a few seconds, the only noise in that $60 billion home was the sound of her own desperate gasps for air. Her silver pendant, a gift from her grandmother when she was just 8 years old, snapped from its chain. It slid and spun under the light of the chandeliers, finally stopping near a pair of shiny black dress shoes. Nobody offered a hand. 500 of the city's elite saw a woman bleeding on the ground, yet not one person moved. In a place like this, influence was the only thing with value, and everyone there believed Lenora Washington had absolutely none. Her husband, Darnell, stood above her, his breath heavy. His handsome features were contorted in a mix of fury and triumph. His mother, Beverly, stood nearby, holding her champagne flute high as if celebrating a win, and Candace Thornton, the woman now in Lenora's place, turned and walked away laughing, her heels echoing on the stone. But they were all oblivious to the old security guard, who was quietly kneeling. He reached down to retrieve the pendant. None of them noticed his shaking hands as he looked at the inscription, and none of them could hear him speak into his radio, his voice unsteady from 40 years of anticipation. "Code Harrison Ballroom. She has arrived. Get Mr. Vincent here now." 72 hours before, Lenora was someone else. Not in a dramatic, life-changing way, but in the quiet way a person changes after being slowly worn down. Over 5 years, she had been erased bit by bit until she forgot the sound of her own voice when it was not saying sorry. She had woken up at 5:15 that Tuesday morning in a small apartment she struggled to pay for. The bed was empty on one side. Her husband was gone again. The sheets on his side were cool and undisturbed. She no longer felt surprise, because surprise requires hope. And Lenora had given up expecting anything from Darnell Washington years ago. Still, she prepared breakfast for 2. Scrambled eggs with cheese, buttered toast, and coffee with cream and 2 sugars. Just how he liked it. His plate would sit untouched. Just like every other morning. Around 7:30, She would dump the cold food in the garbage before heading to her job, feeling that old, familiar ache of waste and sorrow. It was as much a part of her morning as brushing her teeth. The apartment was tiny but immaculate. Lenora made sure it was perfect because Beverly, Darnell's mother, often dropped by without warning, swiping a finger across furniture to check for dust, like a drill sergeant. The furniture was simple, from a discount store. The only lovely item was a picture of her grandparents, Thomas and Ruth, in front of their small country house in Georgia. Their smiles were so genuine you could almost feel their kindness through the picture frame. Lenora gently touched the photo on her way out. A small ritual she started after Ruth passed away 2 years prior. Thomas had gone the year before. They were both gone, along with their love and their hidden stories. She went to the hospital in a car that had 187,000 miles. Its check engine light had been illuminated for half a year, a small orange signal on the dash that Lenora had to ignore. She did not have the money for repairs. Darnell had taken her savings 4 months earlier for a supposed business deal, and the funds were never returned. She knew better than to bring it up. At Riverside Memorial Hospital, however, Lenora was transformed. She was a nurse in pediatric oncology, where kids faced struggles no young person should ever endure, and she was exceptional at her work. The children called her Miss Lenora, and their crayon drawings covered the inside of her locker door. Their families relied on her completely, and she honored that faith with a gentle strength that was core to her being. That morning, her supervisor, Dr. Crawford, caught her in the hall with news that gave her a rare spark of joy. "Lenora," he said, "I wanted to let you know we are considering you for the head nurse role. You have more than earned it. Your patient results are unmatched on this unit, and every family I have talked to speaks so highly of you." Lenora felt her eyes well up with happy tears for a change. "Thank you, Dr. Crawford," she managed to say. "That means the world to me." She felt weightless for the rest of the morning, carried by that small bit of good news. During her lunch break, she found herself staring at her phone. There were no texts from Darnell, no missed calls. The screen was dark, showing only the reflection of a quietly beautiful face that often went unnoticed. Her dark eyes held a sorrow beyond her 32 years. The silver pendant on her neck glinted under the harsh lights. Her best friend, Clara Jenkins, suddenly stood in the doorway with 2 containers of pasta and a look on her face that said she was about to speak her mind. "Girl, do not tell me you are just sitting here, hoping that man is going to call you," Clara said, placing the food down a little too loudly, "because my therapist said something I have been dying to tell you, and you really need to listen." Lenora sighed. "Clara, I am okay." "You are not okay. You are having a sad hospital salad because he took your food money for his, and I am saying this with heavy air quotes, business. Listen to me. When a person reveals their true self, you need to accept it right away. You are sitting here hoping for a better version of a man who never even bothered with the first one." Lenora could not help but laugh, and the sound of it startled her. She had not laughed in so long. Clara just had that effect. She was bold where Lenora was reserved, and fiery where Lenora was soft. She had a talent for delivering hard truths with a layer of comedy to soften the blow. Clara slid the pasta container over. "Eat something real and hear me out. You know what they say about insanity, right? It is repeating the same actions and hoping for a different outcome. You have been warming up his dinner every night for 5 years, as if one day he will just show up with flowers and say he is sorry. He is my husband, Clara." "A husband who is never there?" A husband who uses your money? A husband whose mother treats you worse than the gum on her expensive shoes? Clara's expression softened as she leaned in. You are worth so much more than this, Lenora. You have to know that. Lenora's fingers went to her pendant, her go-to gesture for reassurance. I know, she whispered. But there is a big gap between knowing and acting. Clara watched her friend for a second, then said words that would echo in Lenora's mind when her world turned upside down. Honey, there is a big difference between treading water and just letting yourself sink, and I am getting scared about which one you have chosen. Lenora got home on Tuesday evening to see 3 people around her kitchen table. They were eating takeout from the downtown Italian restaurant, the spot where she and Darnell had their first date, a place now far out of her price range. Darnell sat at the head of the table, a recent habit that made him look like a king in a castle funded by Lenora's nursing paycheck. To his left was his mother, Beverly, a 58-year-old woman always dressed for a fancy event, with a face that had forgotten how to give a kind smile. On Darnell's right sat Candace Thornton. Candace was 33, a lawyer at a top firm, and the opposite of Lenora in every way, bold, polished, and so aggressive that room seemed to bend to her will. Confidence was her armor, and her laugh could shatter glass. Darnell called her his business partner to anyone who asked, but the way her hand rested on his arm, the way she leaned in close when she talked, and the way she gazed at Lenora with a mix of pity and victory told a story that needed no words. Oh, good, you are home, Beverly said, not even looking up from her food. The chicken from last night was dry, you know. I told Darnell you would find a way to ruin dinner, even when you were not here to cook it. Failure just seems to follow you. Lenora put her bag down without a sound. She had learned to move through her own house like a visitor, quiet and apologetic, trying to be as small as possible. She mumbled a hello that no one answered and went to the kitchen to put her things away. And that is when she saw it. On Candace's wrist, a bracelet glinted in the light with every move of her fork. It was not just any bracelet, it was the bracelet. Darnell had given it to Lenora for their first wedding anniversary. It was a delicate gold chain with a tiny heart charm that he had fastened around her wrist one morning in bed, whispering that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. The bracelet had vanished from her jewelry box 2 months ago. She had searched the apartment frantically for it, and Darnell had called her careless. He said she did not deserve nice things if she could not take care of them, and now it was on another woman's wrist, at her own table, in her own home. That is my bracelet, Lenora said. Her voice was soft, but steady, surprising even herself. Candace looked up as slowly as a cat eyeing something not worth its time. Excuse me? On your wrist. That bracelet. Darnell gave it to me for our anniversary. The table fell silent. Beverly's fork stopped in midair. Darnell's jaw clenched. And Candace. To her credit, she did not even flinch. Darnell spoke first, his voice sharp with the warning Lenora knew so well. I bought it. That means it is mine, and I can give it to anyone I want. Do you think because I put it on you once, it is yours forever? That is your problem, Lenora. You cling to things you have not earned. Beverly put down her fork, leaning back with the smug look of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. She clings to everything. My son, this apartment, that pathetic little nursing job, like a barnacle on a ship that is trying to set sail. Candace then smiled, a slow, calculated smile aimed right at Lenora like a loaded gun. I believe what Beverly means is that some things just naturally end up where they truly belong. She lifted her wrist, turning it so the bracelet sparkled in the light. It is a beautiful piece. Darnell has excellent taste. In jewelry, at least. The laughter that followed was the sound of three people confirming that Lenora was worthless. The worst part was that a tiny, broken voice inside her head agreed with them. She excused herself to the bedroom and quietly shut the door. Even her own pain had to be silent in this house. She sat on the bed and called Clara. She was wearing my bracelet, Clara, in my house, at my table, and he just told me I did not deserve it. Clara was silent for exactly 3 seconds, a personal best for her. Then she said, "Girl, the nerve of those people could light up a small city. You know what you have to do. You need to make a plan." "I just need to survive, Clara. That is all I can manage right now." "No, honey," Clara said, her voice suddenly serious and gentle. "There's a world of difference between surviving and planning. Surviving is treading water. Planning is building a boat. I need you to start building." Lenora hung up the phone and sat in the dark. She could hear the laughter from her kitchen. She touched the pendant her grandmother had given her and wondered if she could ever be brave enough to walk out the front door and never look back. She did not know it then, but that door was much closer than she thought. Wednesday morning felt unnaturally still, like the calm before a tornado. Lenora woke up early, made the 2 breakfast plates again, drove the car with the check engine light on, and went into Riverside Memorial Hospital with her usual small hope that today might be better. Maybe today she would get the promotion. Maybe today Darnell would send a kind message. Maybe today she would remember how it felt to not live in fear. Instead, today was the day her world fell apart. Her badge would not open the staff entrance. She swiped it 3 times, but the light just blinked red with a firm beep that sounded like a door slamming shut on her future. A security guard she had never seen before appeared and asked her to come with him to the administration office. The head of human resources was a woman named Sandra Cole, who had kind eyes but wore an uneasy expression, as if she hated this conversation. "Mrs. Washington, we have received several complaints about your behavior. Aggressive outbursts at staff, suspicion of stealing medication, and inappropriate conduct with patient families. We have to take these allegations very seriously." Lenora felt the ground tilt under her. "That is not true. None of it is true. I have worked here for 7 years without a single issue. Ask Dr. Crawford. Ask anyone on my floor. They all know me." Sandra shuffled papers on her desk, avoiding Lenora's eyes. "Dr. Crawford has been told not to get involved during this investigation, Mrs. Washington. I know this is hard, but we are putting you on indefinite leave, effective immediately." "Who filed these complaints?" Lenora's voice trembled. "I have a right to know who is accusing me." "The complaints were anonymous, but they are very detailed and consistent from multiple sources. I am sorry, we must follow procedure." Lenora walked out of the hospital in a fog, holding a cardboard box with the contents of her locker. It held drawings from child patients, pictures of her grandparents, and the extra pair of comfortable shoes she used for long shifts. 7 years of her life, all fitting into a small box. In the parking lot, while trying to understand what had just happened, she saw something that made her freeze. Candace Thornton was getting out of a polished black car in the visitor's lot. She was dressed in a power suit, the kind that screamed she was there for business, not a personal visit. And when she saw Lenora, standing there with her cardboard box, she smiled. It was not a friendly smile, or even a cruel one. It was worse. It was a satisfied smile, the look of someone whose plan had worked perfectly. Candace walked right past Lenora and into the hospital's administration building without a word. And in that moment, Lenora understood. The complaints were detailed and consistent because a lawyer had written them. The multiple sources were lies because Candace knew how to make false claims look real. This was not just Darnell's random cruelty. This was a calculated attack meant to destroy her career. It was engineered by a woman who wanted Lenora to be left with nothing. No job, no money, and no escape. Lenora drove home on autopilot, her thoughts racing. When she opened the apartment door, Darnell was on the sofa watching TV. He looked at the cardboard box, his expression showing no surprise or worry. "Fired," he stated bluntly. "Jesus, Lenora, can you do anything right? Now, I have to support us completely while you just sit here being useless." "I was not fired. I was suspended. There is a difference. Not from where I am sitting," he said, turning back to the television. "You better find a solution fast, because I am not going to carry your dead weight." His phone buzzed. Beverly's name flashed on the screen, and he answered on speaker, either forgetting she was there or simply not caring. Beverly's voice echoed through the room. "I told you, son, she is dead weight. Cut her loose before she pulls you down with her. Has she found a lawyer yet? Candace said the sooner we file for divorce, the better, before she can try to claim any of your assets." Darnell's eyes flickered toward Lenora, and for a split second, she thought she saw a hint of guilt. But it vanished so quickly, she wondered if she had imagined it. "We will talk about this later, Mom," he said and hung up. Lenora stood in her own living room, clutching a box filled with children's drawings, and saw the truth with absolute clarity. Her husband, his mother, and his mistress were not just mean. They were a team. This was not just neglect. This was a conspiracy. That night, after Darnell went out to wherever he went, Lenora sat at her kitchen table, opened her old laptop, and started updating her resume. She had to find a new job. She needed the money just to survive. But as she lifted the laptop's lid, Darnell's email was still open from the morning. She should have logged out, knowing a better person might have respected his privacy, even if he never respected hers. But a subject line grabbed her attention. Asset strategy. Mitchell Estate. Mitchell was her maiden name. The Mitchell Estate was her grandparents' Georgia property, the small wooden house where Thomas and Ruth raised her with more love than any mansion could hold. She clicked on the email thread between Darnell and Candace. It spanned 3 months, filled with cold, legal language that was clearly Candace's work. They had been looking into her grandparents' 40 acres of land in rural Georgia. They figured it was worth between $200,000 and $300,000. It was not a huge fortune, but it was enough to bankroll the next step in their scheme. The emails laid out their entire plan. Darnell would file for divorce, with Candace as his lawyer. They planned to argue that Lenora was mentally unstable, using fake hospital complaints as their proof. Once Lenora was jobless and discredited, Candace would demand a settlement that handed over the Georgia property. They would sell it, split the money, and leave Lenora with absolutely nothing. The last email was from Candace, sent that very afternoon. It read, "Phase 1 is complete. She is out of the hospital. Phase 2 starts at the Gala on Friday. Be prepared." Lenora's hand shook so violently, the screen became a blur. Her first urge was to scream, to call Darnell, to show these emails to the world. But then, she heard her grandmother's voice, as clear as it was years ago when Ruth taught her life lessons. "Baby girl, when someone is digging their own grave, you don't take the shovel away." Lenora took a deep breath. She screenshotted every single email, sent them to her personal address, and deleted the evidence from his account. She closed the laptop. For the first time in 5 years, instead of breaking down, she began to plan. Thursday morning brought a soft rain that tapped on the windows, a gentle knock, trying to get her attention. With just 24 hours until the gala, Lenora had not slept at all. She had spent the night in the dark, turning over possibilities, feeling for the first time in ages like a person in control of her life, not just a victim of it. Darnell had stumbled in at 3 in the morning. He reeked of expensive perfume and cheap whiskey. He did not even see that Lenora was awake. He never noticed anything about her unless he could use it to criticize her. Claire showed up at 9 with 2 bottles of wine, a box of tissues, and the simmering rage of a friend who had been biting her tongue for 5 years. "Okay," Lenora said at the door. "I need your help. But first, you have to listen without saying a word, and I know how hard that is for you. So I brought wine." Claire's eyes widened. "Did you just tell a joke? A real one? Oh my gosh, who are you?" Despite it all, Lenora managed a small smile. "I found emails, Claire, between Darnell and Candace. They're going to divorce me, take my grandparents' land, and claim I'm mentally unstable. And Candace is the reason I got suspended from the hospital." Claire placed the wine down with extreme care, which is how Lenora knew things were serious. Claire never put wine down if she could be holding it. "You need to tell me everything. Then I'm going to need the address where Candace Thornton parks her car. No violence, Claire. Fine, just some aggressive note-leaving. Now tell me everything." So Lenora did. She explained the emails, the devious plan, the bracelet, and the years of cruelty that she now saw was a calculated campaign to break her down and leave her with nothing. When she was done, Claire was silent for a moment. Then she said, "We have to get your grandmother's papers organized, all of them. If they want the property, we need to know exactly what Ruth and Thomas left you, and we need to find out before they do." They spent that morning digging through boxes Lenora had kept in a closet since Ruth's death. 2 years of grief had stopped her from opening them, the sadness making every old photo feel like a fresh wound. Claire gently handled the papers, creating neat piles on the floor while Lenora sat nearby, touching each memento as if it were sacred. There were old birthday cards, recipes in Ruth's perfect handwriting, and a dried flower inside a Bible. And that is when Claire found it. "Lenora," she said, her voice suddenly quiet and strange, almost scared. "Who is Marcus Harrison?" Lenora glanced over. "I don't know. Why?" "Because this birth certificate says he is your father." The world seemed to spin. Lenora crawled across the floor and took the paper from Claire's shaking hands. It was an official state birth certificate, and the names were typed out clearly. Father, Marcus Allen Harrison. Mother, Diana Rose Harrison. Child, Lenora Ruth Harrison. Harrison, the name from her pendant, the one her grandmother said came from a place of love. "There's more," Claire said, pulling more documents from the box. "An adoption certificate, legal letters from a firm named Vincent and Associates, and Lenora, there's a letter. It's sealed. Your grandmother's handwriting says to open it when the time is right." The sealed envelope from Ruth. Lenora had completely forgotten about it, pushed to the bottom of the box with all her sorrow. Unopened for 2 years, she had always followed her grandmother's wishes, even without understanding them. Lenora held the envelope, her name written in Ruth's beautiful, old-fashioned script. Just seeing that handwriting brought tears to her eyes. "Open it," Claire whispered. Lenora carefully broke the seal and pulled out a letter on cream-colored paper that smelled faintly of lavender, just like Ruth's house always had. "My dearest baby girl," it started. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're old enough for the truth. Your father and I wanted to tell you so many times, but we were afraid for your safety. Your real parents were Marcus and Diana Harrison. They loved you more than anything. Our family built something incredible, Lenora. An empire worth more than you can imagine. But that wealth brought danger, and people who would have hurt you to get to it. So your parents made a difficult choice. They asked us, their most trusted family, to raise you as our own, far away from the Harrison name. We wanted you to grow up understanding your value has nothing to do with money, but you need to know who you truly are. You are the sole heir to the Harrison dynasty. The estate, the companies, the foundation, it all belongs to you. It has been managed in a trust by a man named Gregory Vincent until your 32nd birthday. On that day, you have to claim your inheritance. The head trustee will find you. He has been searching. We love you forever. Your grandmother, Ruth. The silence in the room felt deafening. Claire was the first to speak, her voice a hushed whisper. Lenora. The Harrison estate, the Harrison Foundation, tomorrow night's gala is being held at the Harrison Estate Mansion. Lenora stared at her. Her mind was struggling to grasp this new reality. I know. It is a $60 billion property. I know, Claire breathed. You own it. Lenora's fingers went to the pendant around her neck, the one Ruth gave her when she was 8, engraved with L.H. Harrison legacy. For the very first time, she truly understood. She picked up her phone and dialed the number from the law firm's letterhead. After 2 rings, a professional voice answered, Vincent and Associates, how may I help you? This is Lenora Harrison, she said, her own voice steady and strong. I believe Mr. Vincent has been looking for me. The silence on the line stretched for 4 seconds. Then the woman's voice, thick with emotion, said, Please hold, Miss Harrison. Please hold. 2 minutes later, Gregory Vincent was on the phone. His first words were, Thank God. Mr. Vincent's voice was filled with the controlled urgency of a man who had finally found something priceless. Miss Harrison, we've been searching for you for 3 years. After your grandmother passed, we lost our only way to contact you. Your parents' directions were very specific. The trust becomes active on your 32nd birthday. That's tomorrow. Lenora pressed the phone tighter to her ear, as if the pressure could make it all feel more real. Can you tell me what is in the trust? Miss Harrison, this is a conversation for us to have in person, but I can tell you this. You are the only heir to the Harrison dynasty. The estate, the properties, the foundation, and the controlling shares in Harrison Industries. Everything your parents created, it is all yours. On the other side of the phone, Claire, who had her ear pressed against it, made a soft, choking sound. With a feeling like a small creature being crushed, Mr. Vincent spoke again. There's a gala tomorrow night at the Harrison estate. It's the annual foundation charity event your parents started 30 years ago, Miss Harrison. It is your home, so your presence would be fitting. My home, Lenora said, the words feeling foreign. It's my home. And there is another thing, he added. The trust contains your parents' records about security concerns. They believed the crash that killed them was no accident. That's why they sent you away. They gave up knowing you just to keep you safe. Lenora shut her eyes, sharp eyes. All this time, Ruth and Thomas were not lying when she asked about her parents. It was protection. It was the most painful kind of love. Mr. Vincent, there is something I must tell you, Lenora stated. My husband has no idea who I am. No one in my life does, except for the woman right beside me. Gregory Vincent paused for a long moment. Well, he said cautiously, tomorrow evening should be quite eventful. I will make sure security is ready. After the call, Lenora and Clara sat on the floor, surrounded by paperwork and shocking truths. Clara finally said what they were both thinking. So, the husband who has spent 5 years telling you that you are nothing is trying to steal your grandparents' tiny house. while you secretly own a $60 billion estate. And tomorrow, you both will be in your mansion, and he is clueless. Lenora just nodded. Wow, Clara said slowly. The nerve of those people could run a small town. But yours? You could power the entire East Coast. For the very first time in her memory, Lenora felt a new sensation. It was not quite hope, but something fiercer, something with teeth. That feeling, however, lasted for exactly 4 hours. At 3 in the afternoon, Lenora went to her bank. She needed cash. Whatever was about to happen tomorrow, she needed real resources today for a divorce attorney, a new phone Darnell could not track, and basic things to get through the next week while the inheritance was processed. She put her card into the ATM and checked her balance. Checking account, $0.00. Savings account, $0.00. Lenora just stared at the screen. She tried again. The result was the same. Every single penny, from her nursing job paychecks and the small emergency fund she had carefully saved for years, was gone. She phoned the bank, and a representative confirmed the money had been moved. The transfer happened that morning into a new joint investment account. It was authorized by Darnell Washington, who was listed as her joint account holder. Lenora ended the call and dialed Darnell. He picked up on the second ring, his voice casual, yet cold. "Oh, that," he said. "I moved our money into an investment account for our future. You should be grateful." "I can't access any of it, Darnell. I have absolutely nothing." "Then I suggest you'd better not get on my bad side." He hung up. Lenora stood inside the bank, the phone in her hand, feeling like a useless brick. 24 hours ago, she had learned she was the heir to $60 billion. 4 hours ago, she had felt a surge of strength, and now she could not even buy a cup of coffee. She called Clara and explained everything. Clara's reaction was instant and full of cursing. It ended with, "You are staying with me tonight. Don't you dare argue. I have plenty of wine and plenty of fury, and you can have all of it." Later that night, in Clara's cozy, cluttered apartment filled with plants, empty wine bottles, and the powerful love of the one friend who never abandoned her, Lenora sat at the kitchen table. "Clara, I have absolutely nothing. No money, no job, and no evidence, because Darnell can wipe my phone remotely. I know on paper I'm a billionaire, but at this very moment, I feel like the most helpless person alive." Clara sat across from her, taking both of Lenora's hands. "Listen to me," she said. "You have one thing they will never have. You have the truth, and tomorrow night, you will walk into that gala, you will stand inside your own house, and you will let the truth do its job." What if that's not enough? Clara squeezed her hands tighter. It is always enough. It just doesn't always feel that way in the moment. On Friday evening, the Harrison estate was a shining jewel on the hillside. Its windows cast a golden glow over perfect gardens that seemed to go on for acres. A line of cars, black and silver, and gleaming like mirrors, dropped off guests sparkling with diamonds and the special kind of confidence that comes from a life without refusal. Inside, the ballroom was a temple of money. Crystal chandeliers dangled from ceilings painted with scenes from American history. The marble floors, brought from Italian quarries, reflected the guests like a calm lake. A string quartet played something elegant and expensive. In a corner, as waiters floated through the crowd with champagne on silver trays, there were 500 guests. The city's most influential families, with old money and new money, all of them acting important. And somewhere, in this stunning room, the woman who owned it all was about to show up in a borrowed dress. Clara had worked magic with what little she had. She had searched 3 closets, her own, her sister's, and another she claimed was unattended, and found a simple black dress. It fit Lenora perfectly, as if it were made for her. It was not flashy or showy. It was simply elegant, making Lenora's dark eyes and quiet strength the focus for anyone who looked closely. But no one at this party ever noticed quiet strength. They noticed loudness, glitter, and the performance of wealth. "You look stunning," Clara said, fixing Lenora's necklace. "Now stick to the plan. Mr. Vincent will meet you at the service entrance at 8:30. Until then, you are just another guest. Do not engage with Darnell. Don't give anything away. Just watch." Lenora nodded. Then she gave Clara a hug so fierce, it made her friend gasp for air. "If this all goes wrong," Lenora whispered, "you are the greatest friend I've ever known." "Nothing is going wrong," Clara said with conviction. "And after this, I want a full report on every single expression Darnell makes when he learns the truth. I need to know if his left eye twitches first, or if he just freezes like a statue. I've got money on the statue." Lenora walked into the ballroom through the main doors. It felt both strange and perfectly right. She was walking into a place she now knew was hers, surrounded by people who saw a nobody. In a dress that was not hers, and shoes that hurt, because Clara's feet were a half size smaller. The strangeness of it all nearly made her faint. She spotted Darnell right away. He was in the middle of the biggest group of people, holding a glass of whiskey like it was a prop for a show about success. He was handsome. She had to admit that, with a kind of charm that made people trust him too quickly. His suit was costly, likely bought with money he didn't really have. His smile was big and well-rehearsed, aimed at everyone but the wife he had tried to destroy. Candace was next to him, wearing red, with her hand on his arm as if she owned him. She was beautiful and sharp, and she moved through the room as if she were already planning to redecorate. Beverly stood close by, armed with champagne and judgments, wearing designer clothes that screamed her imagined social status to everyone. Lenora stayed near the walls of the room. She moved with the quietness she had learned in her own house, taking up as little room as she could. But this time, being invisible was a strategy. She watched, she listened, she learned the layout of her own home. The paintings on the walls told the story of the Harrison family. A portrait of Marcus and Diana was in the East Wing. When Lenora saw it, she stood before it for a very long time. Gazing at the parents she never got to know. Marcus had her eyes. Diana had her hands. They looked like people who had been truly happy. The immense weight of what they had given up to save her pressed down on her chest. She was still standing there when Darnell appeared. His voice came from right behind her, low and threatening, filled with the special poison he saved for moments like this, when he thought his public reputation was on the line. "What in the world are you doing here?" Lenora turned around slowly. "This is a charity fundraiser. It is open to everyone. I told you specifically not to come." His eyes scanned her borrowed dress with pure disgust. "And you come here looking like that, in front of all these important people?" Beverly appeared at his side, as she always did whenever there was a chance for cruelty. "Oh goodness, she is here. Somebody really ought to call security." And then Candace arrived, completing the circle, with a glass of champagne in her hand and a cruel look in her eyes. "Let her be, Darnell. It is actually quite amusing. It is like seeing a stray cat wander into the opera." Lenore felt that old familiar tightness in her chest, the reaction her body had learned over 5 years of this abuse. But underneath that feeling, something new was taking root. A quiet strength that had been forged in a bank lobby and strengthened in a friend's kitchen. Her strength came from a letter from the grandmother who loved her enough to conceal the world's biggest secret. She looked at Darnell, and finally said what she came to say. I know about the emails, Darnell. I know the plan to steal my grandmother's house. I know Candace invented the complaints at my job, and I know you took all our money yesterday. The people around them fell silent, the way a crowd does when it smells blood in the water. It was not a shocked silence, but an eager one, the kind with wide eyes and tilted glasses, knowing this would make a great story tomorrow. Darnell's face changed 3 times in a flash. First, there was shock, the unguarded look of a man who knows he is caught. Then came the calculation as his mind raced. And finally, he chose the one that had always worked before, pure indignation. You are being delusional, he said, loud enough for the guests to hear. She has been like this for months, paranoid, aggressive. It is why she lost her job. Beverly added her part, a line she had rehearsed for years. Someone should call an ambulance. She is clearly having an episode. Then Candace stepped into her role as the calm professional, setting the final piece of the trap. As an attorney, I advise you to stop making accusations you cannot prove, Lenora. Defamation is a serious crime. Lenora felt the moment become crystal clear. This was it. This was the moment she had planned for, when the truth would finally win. She had the screenshots. She had all the evidence. She reached for her phone with a steady hand and opened her pictures. The screenshots were gone. Every single one had been deleted. The email chain, the asset plan, the messages between Darnell and Candace plotting her ruin, all of it was erased. Darnell leaned in so only she could hear, and his whisper was the cruelest thing he had ever said. Find My Phone is a fantastic application, Lenora. I watched you screenshot everything. I deleted them this morning, right along with your money. He pulled away with a smile the guests would see as concern for a troubled wife. Honey, he said gently, performing for his audience, why do you not let me take you home? You are not well. The murmuring began instantly. Poor woman, she seems confused. I heard the hospital fired her. Such a shame. He is so patient. Candace was already spinning the tale to women nearby, her attorney's voice smooth and sure. She has been struggling with mental health for months. It is genuinely very sad. We have been trying to get her help. Lenora stood in the middle of a room full of people who thought she was crazy, holding a phone with no proof, wearing a borrowed dress that now felt like a costume. The walls of the trap closed in around her perfectly. Then Darnell grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into the soft spot above her elbow, the place that always bruised easily but could be hidden by sleeves. I told you to leave, he hissed, his kind act vanishing now that the crowd was his. I am sorry, everyone, he announced, pulling her toward the door. My wife is unwell. She has been making these accusations for weeks. We are getting her help. Let go of me, Lenora said, pulling against his grip. Do not touch me. See? He turned to the crowd with a look of exhausted patience. This is what I deal with. Aggressive, unstable. I have tried everything. Beverly appeared beside them, with her champagne and her poison. Poor dear. She was an orphan, you know. No upbringing, no family, no stability. It was only a matter of time before she cracked. Candace, from several feet away, but loud enough to be heard, added the final stone to the wall. It is actually very common in cases of childhood abandonment. The attachment issues present as paranoia and aggression. I have seen it documented. Lenora looked around the ballroom at 500 faces staring back at her. They showed a mix of discomfort, fascination, and the pity people feel when they think someone is having a public breakdown. Not one face showed the one thing she was looking for. Not one person in that entire room was willing to admit that what they were seeing was wrong. The tears came then, not the quiet, invisible tears She had taught herself to cry, but real tears, the kind that twist your face and shake your shoulders and make sounds you cannot stop. "Does not anyone see what is happening?" she said, her voice breaking on the words. "Cannot anyone see this?" Darnell's face changed. The performance was over, and what was left was ugly and real. "You will never amount to anything," he said. "You are nothing. You came from nothing, and you will leave with nothing." And then he shoved her. His hands hit her shoulders with a force that shot through her the body. She stumbled back, her heels catching the hem of the dress. Her arms flailed for something, but there was only air and the spinning chandelier light. Then the marble floor rushed up to meet her. The impact cracked something in her shoulder. Her hip hit the stone with a sound that echoed through the ballroom. Blood appeared on her lip where she had bitten it. And the silver pendant from Ruth, the last gift from her grandmother, broke free from its chain. It skidded across the Italian marble, spinning in the light until it stopped against a pair of polished black shoes. 500 people watched. Nobody moved. Mr. Wilson had worked security at the Harrison estate for 40 years. He was hired by Marcus Harrison himself, back when the mansion was new and the family was building its empire. He had watched Marcus and Diana fall in love in these halls, had seen them dance in this very ballroom on their wedding night. He had been trusted with secrets most people could not imagine, and he was there the night they died. He was 72 now, gray-haired and kind, and slower than he once was. But his mind was sharp, and his memory was sharper. When the silver pendant slid across the marble and stopped at his shoe, he did not need even 2 seconds to know what he was seeing. The engraving was small but clear. L. H. Harrison Legacy. He had seen this pendant before. Marcus Harrison had shown it to him 30 years ago. On the night, he explained the plan to hide his infant daughter. "If anything happens to us, Wilson," Marcus had said, his voice heavy, with a choice no parent should have to make. "This pendant will identify her when she comes home. You will know." Wilson knelt beside the woman on the floor. She was hurt, bleeding from her lip, her shoulder at an unnatural angle. Her eyes were full of tears and pain and a sadness so deep it looked like it had lived there for years. But through it all, he saw something else. He saw Marcus Harrison's eyes looking back at him. "Miss," he whispered, helping her sit up gently. "Are you all right?" She nodded weakly, not trusting her voice. Wilson picked up the pendant with hands that trembled. He read the engraving one more time to be absolutely certain, though he already was. Then he pulled out his radio and spoke into it quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had waited 40 years for this moment. "Code Harrison, ballroom. She is here. Send Mr. Vincent to the East Corridor, private room, immediately." He did not take Lenora back into the ballroom. He did not make an announcement. He did not confront the man who had just pushed the rightful owner of this mansion to the floor. Instead, he helped Lenora to her feet with a gentleness reserved for something irreplaceable. He guided her through a side door most guests did not know existed, down a corridor lined with portraits of her own family, to a private room where the world could not reach her. He brought her water, a first aid kit, and a clean cloth for her lip. And then he sat across from her and said the words that changed everything. "Miss Harrison, I worked for your parents for 15 years. I was there the night they died. I promised your father that I would protect this estate until you came home." He paused, and his old eyes glistened. "And now, you are home." Lenora stared at him. Harrison, everyone kept saying that name. "My grandmother," she started. "Ruth was the bravest woman I ever knew," Wilson said. She gave up everything to keep you safe. A comfortable life, a family name, her connection to this world. She lived in a 3-room house in Georgia and grew vegetables in the backyard, and she did it because she loved you more than anything else in this world. 20 minutes later, Gregory Vincent arrived through a service entrance. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, in the presence of someone who handled enormous responsibility with practiced grace. He spent 3 years looking for Lenora after Ruth's death broke his final link to the hidden heir. The relief on his face was so deep it almost looked like sadness. "Miss Harrison," he said, sitting with a leather case of documents, "I am so sorry for the delay. Your grandparents were very good at hiding you." He opened the case, revealing the truth in print. There were trust papers naming Lenora as the sole heir to the Harrison estate, deeds to 47 properties, and controlling stock in Harrison Industries. He also showed her the charter for the Harrison Foundation, which was funding the party next door. The estate was worth $60 billion. Lenora stared at the papers, then at Vincent, then at Wilson, who stood near the door, with tears silently streaming down his weathered cheeks. "He shoved me onto the floor," she said softly, "in my own home, on my own marble." "Yes," Vincent confirmed, and the security cameras recorded all of it. "Miss Harrison, the real question is what you want to do about it." Lenora remained silent for a long while. The muffled sounds of the party came through the wall, music and laughter from people who saw her suffer and did nothing. Then she said something that shocked both men. "I do not want revenge. I want justice. There is a difference." Lenora's first call was to Clara. The phone barely rang once before Clara picked up. The sound of someone stress-eating cheesecake clearly audible. "Girl, I have been working on a whole cheesecake waiting for your call." "What is going on? Are you all right? Should I come down there?" "I will. I am putting my shoes on now." "Clara, I need you at the Harrison estate. Use the East Service entrance and bring your laptop." Why does this feel like I'm about to help with something amazing? Because you are. And Clara, bring the cheesecake. While she waited, Lenora asked Gregory Vincent 3 very specific and strategic questions. Each one showed a mind that was not broken by 5 years of cruelty, but made sharper by it. First, Candace Thornton tried to have me committed tonight. She wants me institutionalized against my will. Can we stop it? Vincent's face grew stern. She did what? Yes. Now that your identity is confirmed and Judge Holloway is here, we can have that thrown out immediately. Second, Darnell emptied my bank accounts yesterday. He moved all of it to a joint account I cannot touch. Can we track where that money is? Vincent gave a firm nod. Our financial experts can trace it completely within hours. Moving marital assets without your permission is a form of financial abuse and fraud. Third, what about the complaints against me at Riverside Memorial Hospital? If Candace made them up using her power as a lawyer, is that illegal? Vincent nearly smiled. It is more than illegal. It is grounds to have her disbarred. Since she used fake evidence to tamper with medical licensing, there could be federal charges too. Lenora looked at him, her gaze unwavering. Then this is what I would like to do. She did not march back into the party. She did not get on stage to make a speech. She did not need 500 people to see her power, to know that she had it. Instead, she had Vincent discreetly speak to 3 people at the gala. The first was the board chairman of Riverside Memorial Hospital, a man named Dr. Thomas Reed, who was sipping champagne by the bar. Vincent approached him quietly, showing him proof that the complaints against Lenora Mitchell, now Lenora Harrison, were faked by a lawyer committing fraud. Dr. Reed's face changed colors, until it settled on a pale white, as if he was already totaling the hospital's legal exposure. The second person was Richard Calloway, the developer who handled Darnell's supposed business ventures. Vincent told him, also very quietly, that Darnell Washington's wife was the true owner of the Harrison estate. Richard's glass stopped halfway to his lips and hung there for almost 15 seconds. The third was Judge Patricia Holloway, a family court judge, famous for her strict stance on domestic abuse. Vincent showed her the security video of Darnell shoving Lenora. He included papers documenting the financial abuse, the fabricated evidence, and a pattern of manipulation that lasted 5 years. The judge replayed the video, her expression hardening into one that defense lawyers in the state knew to fear. As these quiet talks took place on the party's fringes, Darnell, Beverly, and Candace were celebrating in the middle of it all. They did not know the foundation was cracking beneath them. They were too busy feeling proud of their supposed win. That is when everything started to fall apart. Richard Calloway was the first to approach Darnell, his face looking like he'd just learned his home was on a sinkhole. "Darnell," he said cautiously, "I just had a very strange conversation. When were you going to tell me that your wife is a Harrison?" "A what?" Darnell scoffed. "My wife is a nobody, just some nurse from Georgia." Richard stared at him for a long, awkward moment. "Right, okay. I think I am going to get some air." He quickly walked off. Darnell watched him leave with a puzzled look, then shrugged and rejoined his conversation. Across the ballroom, the hospital chairman cut in on Beverly mid-sentence. "Mrs. Washington, are you aware the complaints against your daughter-in-law are now part of a criminal fraud investigation? The lawyer involved could lose her license." Beverly's champagne flute shook in her grip, and in a quiet corner, Candace's phone buzzed. She answered, and all the color left her face as her firm's managing partner gave her a message that concluded with the words, "Have your desk cleared out by Monday morning." The walls were closing in on them all at once, from different places for different reasons, and none of them knew why. They exchanged glances across the room, their faces showing a rising panic, like animals sensing a predator they could not yet see. Just then, the doors opened, and a man none of them anticipated entered. Derek Hollister was 40 years old, perfectly dressed, with the cold, calculating eyes of someone who saw people as either tools or obstacles. He specialized in corporate takeovers, a nice way of saying he took things from people who were unable to fight back. He had been trying to get his hands on Harrison assets for a decade. He had informers at the Gala. Of course he did. A man like him never went anywhere without gathering intelligence. When his sources told him that the long-lost Harrison heir had finally appeared, he acted with the speed of a man who had been preparing for this exact opportunity. He found Lenora in the side room, entered without an invitation, sat down, and made a threat that shattered Lenora's entire plan. "Miss Harrison," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes, "the missing heir. I have waited 10 years for this. Your parents' trust has a special condition. If the heir cannot prove sound judgment and a stable life by their 32nd birthday, the estate goes into a conservatorship. I have already filed the legal paperwork, arguing that a woman facing a psychiatric commitment order does not meet that requirement." Vincent went pale. "The psychiatric hold that Candace filed?" Derek's smile grew wider. "It is funny how things connect. By tomorrow morning, I will have a court order that puts the whole Harrison estate under my control. After that, I will buy it all at auction for practically nothing." He stood up, adjusted his coat, and left. The room fell silent. Lenora looked at Vincent, and Vincent looked at Wilson. For one awful second, the victory they were building crumbled like a house of cards. Then Lenora spoke. her voice completely calm. That psychiatric hold, who has to sign off on it? A judge, Vincent answered. Within 72 hours. Is Judge Holloway still at the party? Vincent's eyes widened. Yes, she is. Then we have to speak with her this instant. Lenora walked back into the ballroom, not through a side entrance, but through the main doors. It was the same entrance she had used 4 hours before as a nobody. But she was not a nobody anymore. She was not invisible. She was not small or apologizing for being alive. She was Lenora Harrison, and she was entering her own home. She went straight to Judge Patricia Holloway, who was by the east windows holding a glass of water, looking like a woman who had already made up her mind about several things tonight and was ready to make more. Your Honor, Lenora began, her voice carrying the clear strength of someone who was no longer afraid. My name is Lenora Harrison. In about 30 minutes, a false psychiatric commitment order with my name on it will be presented to a judge. It was filed by a lawyer named Candace Thornton, who is being investigated for faking evidence. A man named Derek Hollister plans to use that order to steal my inheritance. Judge Holloway looked at her over the top of her glass. And why would I believe you? Because Mr. Wilson, who has served this family for 40 years, I can prove who I am. Mr. Vincent, the Harrison Estates head trustee, has all the documents you require. And if you would please look across this hall at the man who knocked me down 2 hours ago, you will find him laughing. He is standing with the woman who tried to have me committed. The judge scanned the room. Darnell was indeed laughing, but it now looked forced. Candace was beside him, her eyes nervously searching for an exit. Beverly, on her third glass of champagne, had trembling hands. Judge Holloway said, "Show me all of it." They went to a private room. Vincent laid the papers out on the table. Wilson gave his statement. The security video played on a screen, clearly showing Darnell's violent push from 3 separate viewpoints. There were medical files, financial statements, the false hospital claims, and the email thread. This was the thread Darnell had erased from Lenora's phone, but Vincent's team retrieved it from the hospital server. Judge Holloway reviewed every detail with the skilled precision of a woman who spent 30 years telling fact from fiction. When she was done, her expression toward Lenora was one of respect, and perhaps even awe. Miss Harrison, in 30 years on the bench, I have learned a thing or two about bravery. The people who work to silence you are always the ones most terrified of your voice. You did not have to scream tonight. You only had to appear and state the facts. That is more strength than most people ever find. She got to her feet. Let us make some proclamations. Judge Holloway moved to the middle of the ballroom and asked for the microphone from the string quartet's music stand. The room grew silent bit by bit, the way large spaces do, as conversations faded in ripples from the stage to the doors. Soon, 500 people stood quietly. Champagne flutes paused in midair, their faces aimed at a woman with undeniable authority. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge started, I apologize for this disruption. I have a few proclamations that need your attention. First, we have issued an emergency protective order against Mr. Darnell Washington for domestic assault. This happened tonight before 500 witnesses and was recorded by security cameras. Mr. Washington, you will stay 500 feet away from your wife. Darnell shot up from his seat so quickly that it fell over. This is ridiculous, he protested. The judge went on, as if he had not spoken. Second, a false psychiatric commitment order filed against Mrs. Washington is now dismissed. The lawyer who filed it, Miss Candace Thornton, is being reported to the state bar. She faces disbarment and a referral to the district attorney on criminal counts, including fabricating evidence and conspiracy. Candace was already heading for the exit, her self-preservation instincts taking over. 2 security guards, placed there by Wilson, blocked her way with the calm resolve of men who were masters of their trade. Third, Judge Holloway's voice gained a resonance that seemed to make the chandeliers hum. A legal request by Mr. Derek Hollister to put the Harrison estate into a conservatorship has been rejected. That request was built on the fraudulent commitment order, and its dismissal makes the entire petition baseless. On the other side of the room, Derek Hollister carefully put down his glass and walked to the exit, never looking back. He was a man who understood when to walk away from a bad bet, and tonight the bet was a total loss. And lastly, Judge Holloway announced, and the silence in the room became so heavy you could feel it on your skin. Many of you are aware that the Harrison family, who founded this estate and represent one of America's greatest philanthropic lines, has been without a direct descendant since Marcus and Diana Harrison's tragic death 30 years ago. Tonight, I am privileged to present their daughter, the one and only heir to the Harrison estate and everything it includes, Miss Lenora Harrison. Lenora walked in through the main doors of the ballroom. She still had on Clara's simple black dress. Her lip was still swollen from her fall, and her shoulder throbbed with each beat of her heart. Around her neck, fastened again by Wilson's gentle, sure hands, was the silver locket that started it all. She had no bodyguards. She wore no designer gown. No dramatic music or special lighting announced her arrival. She entered the room. She entered the same way she had come in hours before, with quiet simplicity and no theatrics. Lenora Harrison never needed a performance to have power. She only ever needed the truth. The ballroom filled with gasps and murmurs that grew into a tidal wave. 500 people were re-evaluating everything they thought they understood. The quiet woman in the plain dress, the wife Darnell, called a nobody, the orphan Beverly ignored, the stray cat Candace scorned. That woman owned the very floor beneath their feet. She owned the surrounding walls, the roof overhead, and the fixtures that cast light on their shocked faces. Darnell's expression went vacant. His mind, usually so fast with insults and schemes, could not make sense of this reality. The color drained from his face, first from his cheeks, then his forehead, and finally his lips, until he looked like a man watching his own burial. "That is not possible," he whispered. "She is a nobody. She is an orphan from Georgia who was a nurse." "She has everything," Vincent stated, stepping up with the confidence of a man who had guarded this secret for 40 years. This mansion, with a value of $60 billion, is hers. The Harrison Foundation, which is funding this event, is hers. The whole Harrison legacy, including all its money, its properties, and its investments, it all belongs to Miss Lenora Harrison. It always has. Beverly's champagne flute slipped from her grasp and broke on the marble floor. The sound was clean, sharp, and absolute, like a final punctuation mark at the end of a long story. Lenora faced Darnell, the man who said she was worthless, who took her money, ruined her career, and pushed her down in her own home. She looked at him not with rage or victory, but with clarity, the clear sight of someone who finally sees another person for what they truly are. "You pushed me to the floor of my own house, Darnell," she said softly. "And the worst part is not that you were unaware it was mine. The worst part is that it should never have mattered." She then faced Beverly, who had collapsed into a seat, clinging to the armrests, as if they were the only things stopping her from falling off the face of the earth. "You called me worthless, a burden, an orphan with no value, but I have always been the same person, Beverly. The only thing that changed tonight is your discovery that I have money. The fact that money is the only thing that makes you see my humanity tells me everything I need to know about your character." Beverly's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. For the first time ever, the woman who always had a cruel remark was completely silent. Lenora then looked at Candace. She was the lawyer who plotted the end of her career, who wore her bracelet to her table, and who tried to lock her away to make room for a corporate takeover. "You wanted what you thought he possessed," Lenora said. "You supported him while he ruined me because you thought he was a winner, powerful, and a good catch. But he owns nothing. He never did. And now you have nothing either." From the rear of the room, a voice shouted out with the pure relief of a woman who had been silent for far too long. "Girl!" Clara yelled, rising on her tiptoes to be seen above the heads of the guests. The nerve of these people could light up a whole town. A few people chuckled, not because it was hilarious, but because the intense atmosphere in the room needed a release, and Claire's outburst was the perfect escape valve. Security led Darnell, Beverly, and Candace out of the building. Darnell attempted to protest, to bring up spousal rights, to cite laws he did not grasp, and influential friends he did not really have. Beverly cried dramatic tears that convinced nobody. Candace was silent. She walked out with her head held low, her career destroyed, and the certain knowledge that every single decision she made over the last 3 years had brought her to this exact point of utter professional and personal ruin. The ballroom was still after they were gone. 500 people stood in their fine attire, holding their pricey drinks, and felt a deep unease in their chests. It was a feeling like shame, because every last one of them had seen a woman get knocked down and bleed on the floor, and not a single one had stepped in to help her. Lenora let them feel that discomfort. She did not excuse them. She did not deliver a speech on forgiveness or second chances. She just stood in her own ballroom, wearing her borrowed dress, and said what she needed to say. "This gala is not over. All of tonight's donations will fund scholarships for orphaned children. This will be in memory of my parents, Marcus and Diana Harrison, and to honor my grandparents, Thomas and Ruth. They raised me to understand that my worth was never connected to money." The applause that came next was full of mixed emotions. It was a blend of guilt, admiration, and relief. It was also the kind of deep respect people feel when they see something they know they will never forget for the rest of their lives. 6 months later, Lenora stood in a small cemetery in the Georgia countryside. She placed fresh flowers on 2 simple headstones: Thomas Harrison, Ruth Harrison, loving grandparents, her true family. The rain had stopped about an hour before. The sun finally broke through the clouds, sending down golden rays that made the wet grass sparkle. A silver locket hung from her neck, catching the light just as it always did. It was her only connection to parents she never met, and the grandparents who gave her a world of love. "Thank you," she whispered, kneeling on the ground. "Thank you for keeping me safe. Thank you for teaching me what true wealth really is. And thank you for showing me that my value comes from who I am when no one else is around." She started the Ruth and Thomas Harrison Foundation. In its first year, it gave 400 scholarships to kids just like her. Children raised by their grandparents, kids in foster care, and any child who was ever made to feel worthless. She funded community centers in struggling areas and started programs for women. These programs helped women escape abusive homes, with counselors and lawyers offering their services completely free of charge. She believed some debts should be paid forward. The enormous Harrison Estate mansion was now a community center. The same ballroom where she had once felt so much pain now hosted children's birthday parties and family reunions. Its marble halls were filled with laughter instead of cruelty. She managed the renovation herself keeping the beautiful chandeliers, but adding colorful art made by kids and photographs of happy families. She wanted the sounds of joy to echo where there had once been only silence. She lived a simple life in a quiet neighborhood with a normal car and regular clothes. Every morning, she drove to the foundation and worked right alongside her team, making time to meet the students who received scholarships. She listened to their stories and shared the same advice her grandfather gave her during their fishing trips in Georgia. True wealth, he would say, is not what you have. It is who you are when nobody is watching. Clara's car pulled up, and the horn blared. Clara always honked. It was just part of her. "Lenora Harrison," Clara shouted out the window. "If you don't get in this car, we are going to be late for the ceremony, and I did not get my hair done for nothing." Lenora let out a real laugh, the kind that starts deep down and fills you with warmth. She still had tough mornings and would flinch at sudden movements. She still woke up at 5:15, checking the other side of the bed before she remembered she was alone now. She was learning that an empty bed could be a choice, and being alone could be peaceful, not just painful. Healing was not a finish line. It was something she worked on every day, a choice to believe in herself, even when old doubts tried to tell her she was not worth it. But those old voices were getting softer, and her own was getting louder. She placed one last flower on each grave, gently touched the headstones, and whispered, "I love you both. I will make you proud." Then she walked to the car. Clara handed her a coffee, and they drove off toward the ribbon cutting for a new women's shelter named after her grandmother, Ruth. It was the foundation's latest project, built on one simple idea: that every single person deserves respect, no matter how much money they have. In the rearview mirror, the cemetery faded into the distance. The headstones caught the last bit of afternoon sun. For a brief moment, if you believe in things like that, you might have seen two figures standing by the graves. It was an old man with kind eyes and a woman who smelled of lavender, watching their granddaughter drive away. She carried with her their love and their legacy. The greatest gift they ever gave her was not the $60 billion. It was the absolute certainty that her worth was never, not for a single second, decided by anyone else's opinion of her. It was always, always based on the person she was when no one was watching. And that person, it turned out, was truly remarkable. This story was thoughtfully researched, developed, and edited by our team to provide meaningful content with true emotional depth. Each word was chosen with care, because we feel that stories should do more than entertain. They should give you something valuable to take with you. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.